This is a steal for the New York Islanders depending on what happens tonight at the NHL draft, as the Islanders have just made a massive trade with the Montreal Canadiens, sending out Noah Dobson in exchange for 2 first-round picks and a young player. We're going to break down the return on this episode of Islanders Digest, talk about why I think this is a really good move for the Islanders depending on what happens tonight. Whether they use those picks to bring in James Hagens or they just draft the right 2 players. We're going to talk about the 2 players the Islanders can draft if they don't end up trading that pick up for James Hagens, and more on this episode of Islanders Digest. But really quickly, before we get into this return, we notice that 64% of you who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're an Islander fan, you want more Islanders content just like this, what are you waiting for? Be sure to subscribe, be a part of this Islanders community on YouTube. And wow, we knew a Noah Dobson trade was going to happen likely today, especially after all the rumors coming out. I don't know if I quite expected this return, and I will say, while you might think this return is underwhelming, I think the Islanders actually did a really good job with this trade, and I'm going to talk about why, and it's really going to depend on what happens at the draft. If the Islanders do not make a massive trade that allows them to draft James Hagens, and then they make 2 questionable selections at 16 and 17, which are where the 2 picks are at, then I think this is a weak trade for the Islanders. But as I've said on this channel a lot, as some people are calling this draft a weak draft, I think it's a draft that lacks real depth. And within the top 20, there is plenty of high-end talent to get at this NHL draft. And both those picks are in the top 20, and you never know if a player slides, assuming the Islanders don't trade that pick. But first, let's talk about the main pieces in this return. Kevin Weekes was the first to break this trade, that the Islanders were trading Noah Dobson to Montreal. And look, the media is definitely going to favor Montreal early on. I mean, Montreal is a team that gets so much attention. And for the record, I think Montreal is getting a very good player in Noah Dobson. He's on my wall right here. I love Noah Dobson as a defenseman, but his asking price was too high, and a big part of this trade is the contract that he got in return. And while I do think it's closer to what I would have wanted the Islanders to sign if they did keep Noah Dobson, at that price, I think the Islanders are better off with this cap space. And cap space is a big thing we have to talk about when considering this trade. First, let's talk about everything that came on in this deal. Frank Cervelli describing everything that went both ways in this trade. It's not a leak, it's just a reveal. And for the Islanders, they got a 16th overall pick, a 17th overall pick, and Emil Heineman. And this is a player who I'm hearing is one that Habs fans really appreciate and is going to quickly become a fan favorite for the Islanders. And that is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But first, we got to start to talk about Noah Dobson is going to the Montreal Canadiens, and in exchange, he's getting $9.5 million for 8 years. And this is the first thing we really have to talk about. I was expecting maybe a little bit more, not much, honestly, especially considering Heineman is a very interesting player, and one that I think the Islanders were really smart to acquire, as opposed to a player like Logan Mailloux, who I really had no interest in, especially with his previous history. I was honestly expecting a 2nd-round pick in addition, but really, other than that, I think this is a really solid return, especially when you consider the value of a 16th and 17th overall pick. It might not seem that exciting, but as we're going to get to at the end of this video, there's a lot of value in a pick that high. Now, first, we do have to talk about, actually, let's talk about Dobson, considering he's got a contract, and then we're going to talk about who the Islanders got in return. With that contract, $9.5 million, that's pretty much the outskirt of what I was comfortable with. I think with Noah Dobson, if it was an $8.5 million deal, I would have rather just kept him rather than moving him to Montreal. I don't think he took a discount. People are going to say, oh, he took a discount compared to what he asked for in the Islanders. $11 million was his starting price, and then they worked his way down. I don't know whether or not Noah Dobson did not want to play in New York, and if that's the case, it's even better that the Islanders are letting go of him. But one thing you got to keep in mind with Noah Dobson is, as much as we're going to talk about prospects not being a sure thing, Noah Dobson was not a sure thing. Yes, you had a surefire NHL player. I mean, his resume shows how effective as a defenseman he is. But last year, he took a huge step back. And we don't know what Noah Dobson is going to be next season. Is he going to be 40-point turnover galore Noah Dobson? Or is he going to be 70 points potential Norris candidate Noah Dobson? That's something that's not going to be the Islanders' concern anymore. And yes, if you could have kept him at a reasonable price, I would have loved to bet on Noah Dobson. Again, I love Noah Dobson, but considering how rough he was on defense last season, while I was a big advocate that he could bounce back, and I really think he is going to bounce back to some extent, this season was bad enough last year that it did not make sense to spend $9.5 million, because if Noah Dobson plays the way he did last season, he really is not a $6 million defenseman. He was atrocious, could not score on the power play, and that's another thing you have to factor in with Noah Dobson. Next season or in the future, he likely wasn't going to be getting that power play time, and his point totals were going to go down even further. We know at this point, especially now they trade Noah Dobson, the Islanders are drafting Mathew Schaefer tonight. He's going to be their power play quarterback for the next 15 years, and as a result, there was not quite as much of a role for Noah Dobson. Yes, he would have still been an important part on their right side of their defense. And honestly, I would have liked this trade so much more if they got a Rhinebacker back in return who could really replace Noah Dobson in the future. They're definitely going to have to address a hole on the right side of their defense in the future, and likely will be giving a contract to Tony DeAngelo. But it just did not make sense for the Islanders at that price. Now, if you want to talk about who they got in return, Islander fans are probably going to be like, who the hell is this guy? I've really never heard this name before. And talking to Montreal fans, this is a guy who is a heart and soul player. He's 23 years old, which is definitely the direction the Islanders want to go with their forward core, especially with one of the oldest forward cores in the NHL. And he's a player who is very physical, plays hard, does the right thing on the ice, and he has a little bit of offense to him. Now, how much offense he has is really going to determine how much the Islanders win this trade. If he has a huge step up next season and turns those 18 points he scored last year for the Montreal Canadiens into a, say, 40-30 point season, then this is a huge win for the Islanders. But even if he's just a third line player, a 23-year-old who just puts his heart on the ice at all times, Islander fans know how valuable that is with players like Casey Ziquez, and with him getting older, they need a new identity and more players who play with their hearts on their sleeve, and I think this is a really good fit for the Islanders. In fact, he's going to get a lot more of an opportunity to succeed on the Islanders, and I'm really excited to see what Heineman does for the Islanders. Now, talking about the picks, I think this is obviously the main piece in this trade, and Frank Cervelli points out that the 16 and 17 overall pick, if you just look at, like, on paper what the value of a 4 through 6 pick is, because they have rankings for every pick based on, like, how valuable they are. The first overall pick, of course, has an 100, and then I think it goes quick. It drops very quickly from first to fourth. If the Islanders can package these two picks, or some combination of one of these picks and a player or a prospect, to get a 4th overall pick, a 5th overall pick, a 6th overall pick, and draft James Hagens, this trade is an absolute win for the Islanders, because you're clearing $9.5 million of salary that you're not going to have to spend on Noah Dobson, getting a player who's going to be on an entry-level contract, and then you can spend that money likely next season where it's a better free agent class. The Islanders were strapped for cap right now. They were going to have to move a player in order to make cap to spend on Noah Dobson and Alex Romanov. And now that Dobson is no longer in the picture, they're going to really have more cap flexibility in the future, likely be coming on about $30 million next offseason, which is going to be absolutely incredible for them to land a key player. I'm not going to say a player like McDavid, because that's just not realistic. But you have so many players hitting the free agent market next season, assuming they don't sign. Kyle Connor is one that is getting a lot of attention from me. Martin Necas, Tuck is another player I think is really getting underhyped. And this is just going to allow the Islanders more flexibility. Now, when it comes to the draft, we don't know if the Islanders are going to be able to move up and get that pick. Again, I will say, if the Islanders are not able to draft James Hagens tonight, I think this trade, while I don't think it's a loss, I think it's more of a meh return. I think my excitement is really contingent on this point at getting James Hagens and really having the best draft out of the entire NHL, and bringing in Mathew Schaefer and James Hagens, who I think is the 3rd best prospect in this draft. But if they're not able to make that trade, because as Frank Cervelli does point out, while they do have the value now, it's clear the Islanders do have the value to move up into that position, other teams are going to know this is what they want, and they might have to overpay. And if that means sending a second-round pick, this year's second-round pick, to get James Hagens in addition to these 2 picks, or any combination of picks and assets, then so be it. I say get it done. But if the price is too high, teams are taking advantage of the Islanders, or there's a shocking event where James Hagens goes 3rd overall and the Islanders don't have this opportunity, there are a lot of players in this draft we haven't been talking about in this channel, because the Islanders had the 1st overall pick, and we're not going to pick any of these guys 1st overall. But now the Islanders have 2 picks in the tweens of the NHL draft. I have to say, there are a lot of players in this list that I am highly excited about. And if the Islanders can land, I'm going to name which ones I'm most excited about. I think this is still a win. Now, obviously, you just lost a right-hand defenseman, so if you are picking with the 16 or 17 overall pick, my number one choice is Logan Hensler, who, while is not as offensively gifted as Noah Dobson, he actually does what you want defensemen to do and plays really sound defense. Already played at the college level, and he looked like he knew the part. There's a question with how high his ceiling is, just based on the fact that he's been a little timid on offense, but in terms of defense, his floor is considered to be very, very high. And then from there, if you don't trade for Hagens, I say you pick a forward and pick your favorite out of this group. Kashawn Atchison is actually a player I really like as well, but the Islanders' left-handed defense is going to be stacked at this point. I really look at a player like Lyndon Lakovic. He's a player, at this point, he's projected to go 13, but there are a lot of variants on his where he's going to go in the draft, and he has a lot of size to his game. He's a player who I was really hoping the Islanders would draft in the 10 range. If the Islanders can get him, a player like Victor Eklund likely is not going to be here, or Roger McQueen, but those would also be steals at this range. And then with the more realistic picks, Carter Bear is a player who he dropped a little bit because he had an Achilles injury, but he's an absolute beast, and the Achilles injury is not nearly as bad as people thought. If the Islanders can bring him in, I think that would be another great pick. And then from there, Justin Carbonneau, who's projected to go at this pick right now, would be a player who has potential to be a really strong goal scorer in the NHL. I think with him, he's more of a hit or miss prospect. But again, the Islanders, you're drafting Matthew Schaefer. If you draft Logan Hensler, if you have this pick at 17, feel free to just take a shot and go for the highest upside. In my opinion, I think that is the best way to do this. Let me know what you think about these players in the comments. I wish this would have happened a day sooner so we'd have more days to talk about them. I think this can work out really well for the Islanders. The one thing I think would be an absolute disaster scenario is if they go off the board or trade back further from this point, because again, I think there's a huge drop-off. I would say, in my opinion, the drop-off on this list is at 18, which should not be a problem for the Islanders because they have 2 picks above 18. But after Coots, I think there's a real step back with Reshny and Malcolm Spence. Malcolm Spence is a guy with a ton of heart. I love him as a player. I don't have... If he's there in the second round now, and the Islanders still have that pick, now absolutely draft a player like Malcolm Spence. I think he might slip a little bit. And he also is friends with Matthew Schaefer, but just, we'll see what happens. I definitely think the Islanders win this trade, considering on what happens next. So much with this trade is contingent on what happens tonight at the NHL draft, and it is now so much more exciting for the Islanders, and there is a clear pathway at this point for the Islanders to pull off Hagens. Let me know what you think about this trade in the comments. Do you think the Islanders won, or are you disappointed with the return they got for Noah Dobson? As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. Catch you on the next episode of Isles Digest, likely coming in a few hours as we finally preview the first overall pick. There's been so many trade rumors that we haven't been able to focus on it. We'll hit you that very soon. Thanks for watching. See you in the draft.